Crown podcast. I'm your host, the strategic sales queen, Lynn Whitbeck, and I'm joined by our wonderful guest, Crystal Tate. And today, Crystal and I are going to be talking about why and how you can, sort of finance college. So, college can be one of the biggest financial decisions a family will ever make. Overpaying for college can create years of unnecessary debt and stress. But today's guest, Crystal, is going to share how families can be strategic, informed, and confident so they don't leave money on the table. And I would love to remind you, if you get a ton of value out of this episode, I invite you to subscribe and to give us that 5-star review. Now, Crystal is the founder and CEO of Crystal Clear College Planning and the co-founder of Scholars Service Center. With more than 15 years of experience and over 1,000 families served, she helps families combine smart admissions strategy with financial planning so they can avoid overpaying for college. Crystal's work is especially focused on first-generation rural and middle-income families who want a clear, confident path to higher education. Crystal, I'm really excited to talk about this today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lynn.
So let's just dive right in. And I'd like to just hit some backstory. What inspired you to get started?
So I was a first generation low income student who had no idea what they were doing. So when I went off to college, it was really because my best friend told me to, and I didn't know that I didn't know anything. And I got really lucky that when I got out of college, I worked with a financial planning company. And they actually helped me launch my company. So I was working there as their assistant and doing in-house college planning. And then they shared with me the opportunity and helped launch me. And I've been doing it ever since.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And from coming from that background, that's absolutely ideal. And then really going into this very specific niche.
Mhm.
And so, I'd love to hear from your perspective. What's the biggest mistake you see families make when it comes to paying for college?
I have to pick one.
No, you can give us a bunch. Give it, but like, what's the top? Then 2, 3, 4.
So I would say one of my biggest pet peeves is families like to say, well, Crystal, I'm not going to qualify for financial aid. Financial aid is a very broad topic that encompasses all money in that world and people automatically just think of financial aid as money that's coming from the government. And there's very few people that actually qualify for the money from the government or from the state. And so recognizing that if you're smart about your college selection, that's where the opportunity comes to be able to make college more affordable, because there are a lot of I'm going to call them like the normal private schools that give a lot of merit-based aid. And a lot of families like to look for the big football schools or the Ivy Leagues and the ones that are the hardest to get into in the country. And they are going to go and they're going to pay for the privilege to go to those kinds of institutions, when it is really like a very small percentage of schools in the country that make up that group that everybody wants to go to, versus all of the other really fabulous schools that you can get a really great quality of education at.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I understand that perception. And I remember back when my daughter was applying for colleges, including some of the private colleges. And you're right, she got all of these merit pieces. So it really brought the tuition down. It was down to closer to a comparison with the in-state
Exactly.
University of Washington, et cetera. But what
Yep.
are some of the other things that you find that families, other than that side of the financial aid, what are some of the other things that like, oh, somehow they have to, if they don't go to Stanford or to Harvard, which is, you know, I, speaking as one who did, it just doesn't matter. There's
Right.
those kids that, they're driving BMWs and they've never had any reality in their life. It's not the same as, making your own way and being successful. So share some other ideas.
Yeah, I would say that one of the biggest things is that students think, especially in our area, right, like Kirkland, Bellevue, especially, like we have a lot of high pressure high schools where it is expected, like Mercer Island, that you go to a certain type of institution, or you're not good enough. And that's, I think, does everybody a discredit, right? Like, come on, like there are so many great opportunities, and often people are just looking at the name and what they think they're going to get out of that experience rather than actually doing the work to look at what kind of institution and do they match my values, and what am I actually going to get out of that experience, because there are some of those high end schools where the professors don't teach the classes still, right? Like, or you don't get to do any of those things that you thought. And it's like, okay, well then why did I just spend 80 to $100,000 to go to this school when, like, so I would say that I always laugh, and I had a junior this year who um I was like, well, I really think I want a mid-sized school. And it's funny when you try to have conversation with a teenager about like, well, what is the difference to you between a school that's this big versus that big and their perception of it? And I was like, well, I think it's time for you to get on campus to really see. And they went down and visited Willamette and Salem, Oregon, and came back and they were like, oh, actually, I really loved this school. And I was like, well, that's funny because it's like 1,600 kids, not 10,000 like that you thought you wanted, right? But I really loved the community, the connection with the professors, that everybody knows who I am. Like, right, all of the things that I kept telling them they would really love based on their personality about that kind of school. But they had to see it in order for it to really sink in. And I feel like that is one of those other challenges that sometimes people will be like, oh, well, I'm going to go see the elite schools, but I'm not going to go see any of the others. Like, I'll do that, like, maybe if this or this. And it's like, no, like, oftentimes, like, and it's same thing. I've had kids that are like, I only will go to University of Washington. And I'm like, I think we have other options that we could pick from, right? And so having them get to actually look at and see other schools and see how they could see themselves there, and that actually these could be equally great, if not better fits, I think is a super fascinating. It's just like the psychology of it all, right? Like them actually seeing for themselves and then recognizing, oh, actually that school, like you said, could cost the same as going to University of Washington. Well, if both things are equal, this is the experience at this school versus this one, and they cost the same, what kind of experience do you want?
Yeah.
And starting to take some of, like, the angst and like the decision makings. I will say one of my other biggest frustrations though in this process is that I will meet a lot of families that are like, um, I don't know if I want to afford paying for college planning services, which in the grand scheme, my fees are fairly low in comparison to other people in our area. But yet they will only want to look at schools that are 60 to $100,000 a year, but they don't even have the ability to pay for my services. Oh, we'll figure it out. You ain't figuring out 60 to 100K a year. Like I and so there's a lot of this buy-in behind like, oh, I must go to that kind of school, or if I don't, it's not good enough yet again. And it's like, well, actually, there's a lot of proof out there that's not true, but you have to be willing to look at the other options. And sometimes you encounter people that just really aren't willing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It reminds me of maybe this dates me, but having Calvin Klein on the back of your jeans versus Levi's, right? And it's like, really? You know,
Mhm.
it's one of those things that definitely strikes me. And the value of that education, that to your point that you're just flung into this huge environment, sink or swim, with no support, not even working directly, and it's um and the cost, to your point, is um that's why there's so much intense college debt. And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily from it's the private loans and all the things that people do to for that. So moving forward, you really brought something that's important. How do you help families lower the cost? I mean, you've talked about a few strategies, but do you have like a simple process you walk them through?
So, um, in our world, we believe academic fit should meet financial fit as well as social fit. So we call it the three pillars in our process. And the reality is, a lot of people will just focus on admissions and forget about financial aid or think of it as an afterthought and not realize that there is strategy in regards to what you can and cannot do, because everything is based off of the federal government and the institutions that you're applying to and the kinds of money they do or do not give. So really it's an understanding of, based on your students' academics, your family's financial picture, and the types of schools that you're looking at are the pieces of that that are going to come together and tell us how much in advance we can tell you how much is this school likely going to cost you and why, or what are the other opportunities that you could take advantage of in order to bring that school down. Because I'll have people that'll come to me and be like, well, my kid's smart, they can get into NYU. And it's like, okay, well, they might get into NYU, but that doesn't change NYU's philosophy of financial aid and how they give it. So based on your family's student aid index, this is what it's going to mean. And so those schools that give full financial need, and some have like weird ways of calculating it now, where you can have an income of up to 250,000 at some of those schools and still qualify for need-based aid, but not all of them do that. And so, and if you want to look at a large state school, they don't have to do it at all because they've got plenty of kids that want to come. And so when we're looking at like, how do you save and pay for school, we also tend to flip that model because you've been taught that you should do 529 plans. Well, if you think about it, who came up with that concept? The government. And so when you think about, right, financial aid forms and all of the things, it's like, well, that is a reportable asset on financial aid forms right now for all of the money that you've saved. For some families, that can impact how much money they are going to qualify for. For others, colleges are looking at it in what we call the enrollment management concept. So they're going, well, you have saved for your kid for school. We don't have to give you as much in order to get you to come. It's their institutional priorities. They have choice on how they want to spend their money and whether they want to spend it on you. And so if they think that you can afford to pay, we've seen people not get money because of that. And it's what I call like the gray area. It's very, I'm not going to say it's fair by any means. It's just like the business of college, right? Like this is how they do it. So we don't encourage families to save in 529 plans typically, because that's a reportable asset. Instead, what we're doing is actually looking at, and it does depend on people's financial picture, but sometimes it's just like you can borrow for college, but you need a plan on how you're going to pay it back. And you're only going to borrow what's reasonable in terms of the overall scheme of things, right? For what you're going to be accountable for as a parent that you want to help with versus your student. And being able to say, now, what does that look like? Because if I have the ability to save $1,000 a month, and I can do that because a lot of people don't start saving until high school, to be honest, right? Like most people haven't saved, and that's just like the nature of our society. So if you have, that's great. But if you haven't, it's not too late to do that in high school, as long as you're doing it smart and realize you're leveraging loans while they're in school, continuing to save, and then paying upon graduation. And so we actually use like universal life policies, sometimes whole life policies, sometimes annuities, sometimes tax strategies to reduce down your tax bill so that you don't pay the government money, and instead you can free up money to use that to pay for college. Like there's a lot of different ways based on, and it always changes. Like the big beautiful bill created a lot of opportunity for people to reduce down their tax bill. And if you can do that, you can say, well, I can go to a $60,000 to $100,000 year school because I just saved $60,000 on my taxes. I didn't have to pay the government that money, and instead I freed that up. I could use that for college. Yeah. Right. So it's thinking about it differently than what we've been spoon fed, right? Saving your 529, go buy a house, get a job and a picket fence and the 2.5 kids and the dog, and send your kids off to college, saving in a 529 plan. You can, however, you don't have to. And there's other ways to leverage and actually grow wealth after, and actually still have money after you've paid for college. Because when you think about 2 kids at $100,000 a year for 4 years, you just bought a house in our general area.
Yeah. And I love the fact that with your financial background, how you're looking at this whole big holistic picture to really guide families. So I mean, that sort of leads into, what we've been talking about. The people haven't been necessarily been saving, and why is paying for college such a challenge for so many families today?
Oh goodness. So I see a lot. I mean, over 15 years, I've seen a lot of financial pictures of families. So when people meet with me for a consultation, oftentimes they go, Crystal, why do you ask for so much financial information? And I'm like, because the academics is one piece, but if I don't understand where you're coming from, and I'm not going to, and I'm that person though that will also push a family and be like, well, is this really in your best financial interest? Like,
Yeah.
so now I mean, the government's restricting how much you can borrow from the government. And so you have to go get private loans. And that's going to play a completely different game for families going forward after this year. So I feel like, especially living in Washington, working with a lot of Washington families, granted, it happens in other parts of the country, but like we have a really high cost of living. You can make 250, 300,000 and be working at Microsoft or one of the tech companies, but most of that is going to go to your living, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's really hard for people to find that space, especially if they're a one income. And even I've met families, a lot of times we like to live up to our salaries, right? So you don't, and or if you're not prioritizing it. But I will also say, like, over the years, I've like, say it's a split demographic where I've worked with, like, in our area, we've got a lot of Indian families, right? Asian families and white families. Like that's like kind of the demographic. And Indians value education like so strongly. But they will also, they want, because of where they come from, they think that they can only go to a high-end school oftentimes to get the quality, and that's going to cost them. And so they've saved, but they still haven't saved enough to cover that nut, right? And
Yeah.
so I feel like it's a huge one, it's cultural, right? And then socially it's just it's expected, and some, and so it's just like all of these crazy factors, and it's hard to save 20, 30, 40, $50,000 a year if you didn't start this really young. And even some families are like, yeah, I have 100,000 in my 529 because that was what they said school was going to cost in the future. Well, now it costs almost 40 grand a year just to go to University of Washington for tuition, room and board. And it costs more to house and feed your kid than it does to educate them.
Yeah.
And that is the same across most of the country. And
Yeah.
people don't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, the tuition and your books and things like that and your supplies are just the beginning of
Mhm.
the cost. I love that you've brought that up. And I also, I mean, we're still hitting on this same thing of this very twisted perception because there's so many great colleges out there.
Mhm.
And the whole experience and the quality of the education that you get when you get that more personalized experience and attention. And and at the end of the day, once you start working, after your first job, nobody cares. I mean, honestly, I mean,
Yeah.
just nobody cares.
Mhm.
Um, and speaking from my own experience, nobody cares. So, so I mean, this sort of leads into, um, we've talked about the perceptions, the cultural, this idea, but why do you think that overpaying for college is, I mean, often a blind spot? Because, they're willing to, um, you know, outlay this crazy amount of money for an education, um, that they don't even have the type, I'm sorry, but they don't have the type of experience and the attention for their actual student to be successful.
Yeah. And I love Jeff Salingo's books on, he just wrote one on the dream, how do you kind of redefine a dream school? Because everybody has that perception.
Yeah.
And I love how they say it's not where you go, it's how you go. It's how you take advantage of those opportunities, how you show up on campus, how you get engaged. And yet again, like as a society, of then like this is like the core of what we teach when we're doing, like, I see my job as teaching, educating, and advising parents and students on the fact that you can follow the typical path and do that. But I also get really excited, like the kid that I was saying that was a junior that went and visited Willamette came back and they were like, this was really exciting. And I'm all like, oh, I did my job, right? Like and when you switch from thinking you want to go to a big school to like you actually had an open mind, you got on campus and you saw those opportunities and you go, oh, actually, and I go, yes, like I can say it to you until I'm blue in the face, but you have to be able to see it for yourself and have that open mind. And I feel like that is kind of like a lot of people are just stuck and thinking it's not true, right? Like that it's not an option. But even Jeff Selingo, and that's why I love both of his books, because one comes from an institutional perspective and one from the family perspective. And when he wrote that, I was like, oh my God, this is what we've been doing for the last 15 years. And it's actually in a book. And to be able to say, like, this is yet again, college is a business. You're gonna learn how to work that model, or you are going to be used by that model. And
Yeah.
so it's yet again, it's just like flipping the way that people have traditionally thought about the process to recognizing, yeah, there are thousands of schools where you can have a really great opportunity, critical thinking skills, hands-on experiential learning. Like the faculty knows you have research opportunities, right? Like you're going to set yourself up to go to med school, grad school, or whatever, right? And you can go spend a boatload of money on Harvard Medical, or you can go to, that fancy business school, because that's where the value is, not at the undergraduate level,
Yeah.
because it's a stepping stone. And it's like, do I need to go to MIT to get an engineering degree? No. There are about 5,000 other options, right? Like there are so many options for you to pick from that you can, but that is not going to define your success.
Yeah. I also think a good thing that you mentioned there too is like schools like Willamette and like Whitman, which is in Washington State, they actually have 3-2 programs. So if you already know that you want to get an advanced degree, like you want a master's in engineering, or you want some, since we're talking about engineering, it's a great way to get started, because then you get 2 undergrads and you get a master's degree because it's a 3-2 program. And some of these other schools had that type of opportunity. Whereas in the really big schools like the University of Washington, they don't, you're just a number and they're just weeding people out.
Right. Exactly.
And it's a very different experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a great comparison, is to say, like, typically the smaller to mid-size, even some of the state schools, like some of the state schools act like private schools because they're so small and niche, which is
Yeah.
really great, versus a very large institution, right? There isn't a right or a wrong. It's just that people don't take enough time to really sit back and just think about and or see for themselves what are the differences, and then having a conversation with somebody and asking the hard questions and being able to say, and a lot of kids don't know what they're interested in studying. I would say, like,
Yeah.
that's the other part where, like, people will hit a roadblock around, like, well, if I don't know what my kid wants to study, how do I pick a school? And it's
Yeah.
like, well, when they, like they usually have kind of what I'm going to call it, like, categories, right? Like either you're going to be interested more in the mathy science kind of stuff, or you're going to be interested in maybe any of the others, right? Like more the liberal artsy kind of goods, right? And even if it's business or whatever, like, okay, fine, let's look at your strengths and see what 5 things we could possibly consider. Start to actually look at the courses and what you would have to study and what gets you excited. And then if you're still unclear, let's make sure schools have options for you to change your mind, and that's then not the end of the world. And then what is the overall culture of the school that you want to have, right? And there are many a times, right, I do not win the I want to have a huge football school. And when people come in, like, it's sad for me to say, but right, like after 15 years of meeting with people, you just kind of go, yeah, I see a data sheet of information and I know what's going to happen in that conversation. And then if you have a whole bunch of large state schools, usually I ask that question, like, try to find out from a student, what do you think you want and why are these schools on the list? And it can be sometimes the stereotypical, I just want, big football, and I want to be able to have school spirit, and I just really, I'm extrovert. I want to have a large environment. The idea of a small school gives me limited options. And then I ask the parents, they go, okay, well, that's interesting. And just so you're aware, these schools don't give financial aid. They don't? No, they don't. So I'm looking at Chapel Hill, or I'm looking at this one. That's like 60. This is like $70,000 per year. But my kid's going to get a scholarship, right? They have a 4.0 GPA and a 1500 SAT. No, those schools don't work that way. They don't give money. They don't have to. Is your kid going to be a D1 football player? Well, no. Then no. No. And so it's like just the shock and not understanding, yeah, like that's the model. That's what they care about. What are they paying for? They're paying for things that are making them money. And at that kind of school, it's sports, or right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
anyway.
it is. It's so interesting. So, Crystal, as we wrap up here, what should parents of middle school or high school students be doing right now to avoid overpaying later?
I would say it's really great to encourage, and I love how you said middle school families, because people, I mean, you could start this in elementary school if you're watching
Yeah.
this. Like people think, well, my kid's not in high school yet, it's not time to start. They're not ready yet. They may not be ready, but you still got to figure out financially in advance. And that's
Yeah.
a smart idea, right? And your financial picture is likely going to change by, from the time that maybe you're in middle school versus them in high school. And so what can you do and build that's going to be flexible to help you get closer to your goal? What is your goal? Have you even thought about that? I would say that's a big one too. Like, I ask people, well, what's your budget? Have you thought about how much you want to spend for school? And they go, no, ain't gonna lie, I haven't thought about it yet. They are juniors or seniors in high school, and I'm having that conversation, right?
Wow.
So the sooner people are willing, and it's finances, right? People
Yeah.
like to stick their head in the sand about finances a lot of
Yeah.
times. So
Yeah.
it's challenging for people to just kind of accept, like, it's okay that I haven't done anything now, but it's okay to get started. And the sooner you do, I call it the fire hose effect. The sooner you do it, the less you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose come junior and
Yeah.
senior year, with all of the things that your kid has to do, and then the things you're trying to figure out and prioritize. So that would be my 2 cents.
There you go. Very good advice. So, Crystal, is there anything you wish that I'd asked you that I have not?
I think it's been fabulous conversation so far. I honestly can't think of anything.
Okay.
I got a lot of my soapboxes in, so I think we're good.
All right. So thank you so much for sharing why most families overpay for college and how to reduce costs. I know that our listeners are going to want to know more about you and how they can find and connect with you.
So my website, collegefinancingcoach.com, is a great spot to connect. You will be able to see all of the different things that we have available in terms of free resources. And if you're on LinkedIn and you're a parent, you can also feel free to connect with me there.
Okay. And for those of you who are watching live, then I'm putting these into the live stream chat right now so that you've got that. And for those of you who watch the podcast afterwards, everything will be down below in our notes so that you can connect with Crystal and avoid overpaying for college. And thank you so much for Crystal. And thank you to all of our listeners. I really appreciate your showing up for us every week. And this in particular has been such an informative discussion. I wish I had known Crystal before my daughter went to college. I think that we could have done some things a little bit differently, and definitely for my nieces. So, looking back. But Crystal, thank you so much for being on today. It's been such a delight.
You're welcome.